Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. Okay, we're going to begin. Welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. And for those of you who are coming for the first time, the Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this moment. I am not viewing it as a place just to practice and talk about Stoicism, while that will surely happen here, but a place for us to talk with non-Stoics, Stoics alike, and practice all sorts of different psychotechnologies around this digital campfire. Today, we have Zach Stein with us. Zach is a philosopher of education working at the interface of psychology, metaphysics, and politics, and he's currently an associate at Perspectiva. And he recently wrote an article that was on the Emerge platform called COVID-19, A War Broke Out in Heaven. And it was really well written. And it got some good buzz on the sense-making web. And it's mostly about tracking human development. So I'll hand it to Zach in a moment, and he'll share his thoughts, maybe talk about the article, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And how the Q&A will work. If you have, I'll warm up Zach with some questions. And if you have any questions, just write it in the chat box. And I will call on you, unmute you, and then just ask your question to Zach. If you'd like me to read your question on your behalf, just indicate that in the chat box as well. So that being said, I will hand it over to you, Zach.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it's wonderful to see all the faces on the camera. I've been doing a lot of just dyadic and triadic conversations, so this is actually quite wonderful to have such a large group. And to be talking to Stoics is also nice for me. To kind of even get into what we're going to be talking about, I've been a caregiver for very sick people in my life. And the first time I had to do that, Marcus Aurelius and some of the other Stoics were key in helping me kind of bring over my Buddhism and get it in touch with my understanding of Western philosophy, and also in just reminding me about the anciency of tragedy and human complexity, and that it's kind of a species-specific trait. It is the grappling and the reckoning with tragedy. And so I think the Stoic philosophy is one of those that can accommodate tragedy and transcend tragedy without denying tragedy, which is exactly what has to happen now. That Marcus Aurelius' insight that we are completely interconnected to all things in the universe doesn't mean that the things right up next to us don't matter. It just means that we can put them in perspective so that we can deal with them in an appropriate way. And so a lot of what I'm hearing from spiritual circles is not correct. The denial of tragedy, the denial of objective reality is part of the problem right now, not part of the solution. And so while we want to bring people up and out of getting stuck in the tragic and being incapacitated and overwhelmed by the situation, we want to do that. And we want to liberate people from their shallower concerns and from their neurotic preoccupations that are making their suffering worse. We want to do that, but we don't want to say things that deny the tragedy of the actual situation. So, and this is why I accepted to come to a meeting of Stoics, because suffering, pain, these things are part of the Stoic philosophy, and also a kind of non-escapist transcendence, if I can put it that way, right? A non-escapist transcendence, to be fully in the world, but not of it, which is to say to act as an independent cause, and not only as the result of the causes and conditions that put you there, right? So this notion of freedom and fate, right, and destiny, these are all part of the Stoic lexicon. So I'm happy to be here. That's about where I'll leave it. What I said in the paper is what I wanted to say at this moment about it. And my sense is that, there's so much more to be said, right? I'm in very close communication, working and collaborating with people like Daniel Schmachtenberger and Jordan Hall. We're trying to put boots on the ground, trying to actually do things, trying to do sense making in different areas of the infrastructure and a whole bunch of topics, which you've heard Jordan speak about at length. And so I'm not speaking into those domains. I'm trying to speak into the domains of the human, and especially into the kind of imminent mental health crisis, for lack of a better term, that's coming, but it's actually a spiritual crisis. And so that's my urgency is there. Like, we need masks in the hospital, and we need economic stimulus packages, and we need a whole bunch of things in the kind of lower right-hand quadrant if you're a Wilberian. But we also need a tremendous number of innovations in the realms of psychotechnology and in the realms of, to quote Vervaeke, and in the realms of practice and ritual, symbol. So I welcome any questions in those areas. Even though I have things to say about what's happening, that's not what I'm here to speak about. I'm here to speak to the heart and to the thoughts of the heart.
Mm-hmm. So I will warm up Zach with a few questions. But if you have any questions for Zach, again, put it in the chat box, and I'll call on you, and I'll unmute you. Or if you want me to read on your behalf, just let me know in the chat box. There was a piece or a line that you said in the article, we are living in the liminal, a time of pure potential and change, a time between worlds. And I feel this. And it's like, I can't really, I remember it was like when it dawned on me this was going to be a big deal a couple of weeks ago. I couldn't really just cognitively process this. I just shut down, really. I just kind of handed the keys to what I call the daemon, that certain quality of intuition that says, go here. And then this project emerged. And then once I started to we had like about 20 events within 10 days. And I'm starting to see this as sort of like an incubator for psychotechnology. I'm just inviting a lot of people just to test stuff, because, the Zoom is the framework and everything. And certain things are starting to emerge. Like we have the existential dance party. We have like Stoic breath, like a Wim Hof thing. So it's like, it's really cool. And it feels like alive. So just a general question, I guess, personally for me, and maybe for the rest of the people who are regulars here at the Stoa, is any advice on how to go about this kind of psychotech testing?
Totally. I mean, one first thing is to think about the frames and think about the metaphors. And so I think the psychological technology is a good metaphor, but it's actually not my preferred metaphor because it's a technology, right? And so I like to think about practice and ritual as such, and technology is in the lower right. So Zoom is the technology. And in a sense, it's a noospheric technology, right? It's about the transmission of ideas and the internet and all of that. So I see that as realms of technology which are in play. But the things we're looking for are the things we do with our bodies and with our voices, which are actually deeply organic. And so I'm actually looking for a return to the ritual of living together. This is what we're asked to do in one sense. And so I'm not against technology, but I am against the idea that the human being works like a piece of technology, or that the mind works like a piece of technology. So that's one of my first things would be, is it really a technology? Or is it, for example, something like a natural process, right? That is actually like a rediscovering, right, of an organic reality, an always already existent reality within the living body of the human, within the bones and the DNA, is the possibility for the forms of consciousness that we are getting when we dance, right? Or when we hold each other with the proper language. So I'm looking for a certain kind of deepening into the always already present capacities of the human organism that are there. And And so meditation is one of the classic ones, but dialogos is another. And then many of the rituals which we've inherited from the great traditions could be repotentiated. And so I'm thinking along those lines as well. But when it comes to figuring out what works for a group or what works for oneself, then we're in a delicate situation of self-clarification and basically having communities of practice, right? Because the key thing, at least for me, and I think many Stoics would agree, is not the subjective experience one has when doing a practice. It is the way that practice conditions your choice, right? It is the way the impact of that practice on your choice making, its effect on others, let's say. So if it makes you feel good, that's wonderful. I'm not saying that's bad, but I am saying that the payload, the delivery, what we're looking for at the end of the day is a right action, is the condition for the possibility of right action. And sometimes that will actually require going deeper into, for example, the pain that someone else is experiencing, right? In order to say the right thing to this person, I need to understand their interior state more. I need to understand their pain more, right? That's intense. That's a lot to ask. But as a caregiver with a sick person, you have to do that at times. Like if you're a parent for a child, you have to understand what they're feeling in order to say the right thing. And so, and this is an ability that humans have to care for one another. I think it's another species specific trait, right? Like other animals don't take care of their sick, right? Humans take care of the sick. It's interesting. Like from a strictly Darwinian perspective, like that's a bad idea. Like if the universe runs the way Darwin said, or Darwin in quotation marks, the kind of like fiction of Darwin that we've created, because Darwin was actually much more complex. But if it runs that David Attenborough kind of stereotypical Darwinian way, then we shouldn't be taking care of the sick, right? But we do, right? There's a implicit in the human, in the being of us, is a generosity and a care. But it requires stepping in and again, deepening empathy and doing the practices, not necessarily that make you feel good, although we need that. And often these do make you feel good. So it's not mutually exclusive at all. But the practices that allow you to do the right thing, to be the person you need to be, to say what needs to be said. And so that's about clarifying who you are, clarifying the realities in the field of your experience. And it gets harder to do that as the realities in the field of your experience become more intense, more emotional, more unpredictable, more frightening. And so this is where all the tricks we learned from Stoicism, Buddhism, and other things to regulate and to ground, right, allows you to then experiment with other practices like slowing down. That's a good one. Reflecting. That's another good one. So yeah, a lot of so that was not really a great answer, but I'm just kind of like rambling in the area where you asked the question, because I can't give specific advice. Everyone's in a very unique situation. Right. You know, the most general things you can say are to take care of yourself, and to take care of yourself.
And I'm curious how you personally are taking care of yourself.
Interesting. It's a complicated question. I mean, I've been a caregiver for many years, like over a decade. So I was already in a routine of having to step in to other people's pain to be able to support them, right? And then to not get so caught up in that pain that then I destroy myself. So I already had some balance in that respect psychologically, but believe me, it was hard won. So the basics, you know, eating right, trying to exercise and do a lot of movement, sleeping right. I have a very strict media diet, which is to say I have a limited amount of time that I look at the media every day. And that's important. So I get out of the infinite scroll The infinite scroll is a hyperstimuli in a technical evolutionary sense, which is that there was, I don't know how big the Library of Alexandria was, but it was not as big as the internet. So no matter how much you wanted to scroll through the Library of Alexandria, so there's this sense of just, that is very disorienting, the infinite scroll. And we haven't all of a sudden changed to a social media environment where they aren't making money off of us by selling us advertisements, right? That hasn't happened. Like Facebook is still basically incentivized to keep you paying attention to sell your advertisements. Sorry, guys. So there's still a systematic disruption of your infinite scroll in such a way as to give you disorienting information so you can't make a cohesive story and leave, right? Just so you know how it works. They studied the human nervous system to addict people to Facebook to sell them advertisements. And we use Facebook like we're saving the world with it. So that's the first step, is unplug from that stuff and plug into deeper long form stuff, and specifically conversations with people you know, right? That we need to be together with the people who we love and away from the screens. Now, sometimes we need the screen to get us to that person that we love, but that's a different when you're having a 45-minute Zoom call with somebody. So I protect myself from oversaturation of the media environment, which is a limited amount of time every day, and simply not participating on social media in the standard ways. So that's one good tip. And then, beginning in those conversations that I have with the people that I love, beginning the difficult conversations, right? Having the difficult conversations. And there's many of those, right? Money, right? Health, death, right? These things are now just like in the air. And so the degree to which you try to get along and pretend like they're not makes it hard. You need to clear that space, right? And have a difficult conversation in a sense before you have to, right? And then you can create a safe container in which to love one another and to deal with the reality. And so again, hard won lessons from difficult times, but it's necessary, the difficult conversations to happen, and you need to trust yourself and the other people that you can get through those conversations. So that's important. And if you need help having that conversation, seek help. It's often hard to work that stuff out one-on-one. And there's probably someone around you who loves you, who's maybe really skilled at that, right? And there's going to be people popping up trying to give these kinds of supports all over the place. I'm seeing it happen. I'm seeing like an emergent pop-up mental health safety net, basically. A whole bunch of coaches and therapists and other people and counselors trying to find ways up and into people to get them help, specifically with these kinds of dynamics. So I kind of am of the attitude of, embrace the suck, right? I think Jamie Wheel said that. And be in the tragedy. The post-tragic is in the tragedy. Post-tragic didn't find a way out of the tragedy. Post-tragic's right in it, burning in the tragedy, but not only the tragedy, right? And so usually when you can have these conversations and you can clear, right, then you can touch transcendence without denying the world. And that's what needs to happen. Those are the liberating moments that you can find even in pain and in illness and sickness. So that's some of what I'm doing, is I'm trying to have the conversations that need to be had, which is one of the things we're being called to do, right? This notion that we're all working from home is this notion that like we're supposed to be having our whole job from home, but I actually believe that the work that needs to be done in the home is different.
Nice.
It's the work of being in a home. And some of the most difficult work, actually, which is why most people prefer to leave the home and go work, pretend like that's the most important thing, that the sandcastles we're building, right, which are so fragile, as we're seeing, these sandcastles we're building, right, are not as important as the work we're doing right here every day, right, around the table. And so that's where we're returning to. And, many of us are fortunate enough to have that table in a safe place, but not everyone has a table in a safe place where they can have these conversations. So we need to put ourselves in context, get our shit together, and then start collaborating in a way that we've never seen, basically. So that's the other thing I'm trying to do. I'm trying to, as part of my practice, just work a little bit harder and have more conversations than I would normally have, and try to move things forward in as unself-interested a way as possible, in a way where I'm basically trying to be what's needed in the moment. And again, that's stoicism, right? I'm trying to find a way to clear what Zach might want and figure out what the world needs. And again, things hard fought, hard won from being basically forced into being a caregiver for so many years myself, right? That you figure out how to be what the moment needs. And so this is what we're called to do. And then other things too, like once you've cleared the air and you're in the tragedy, but you're transcendent, but still in it, right? Then you can laugh again. Then you have post-tragic laughter. You can have post-tragic tears that are not self-interested, woe is me tears, that are tears for the world, right? And so there's a humor possible. There's a levity that is possible, but it has to be the levity on the other side of tragedy. It can't be the levity before we actually confront it, right? So like I'll share a very important practice for me all these years was watching America's Funniest Home Videos. I don't know if you guys know America's Funniest Home Videos. It's like very lowest common denominator, like people falling off of trampolines kind of stuff. But I just couldn't laugh. It was so hard to laugh sometimes because of what I was dealing with. And it's just like someone slipping on a banana peel. You know what I mean? Like, so we need to remember those things too, and allow ourselves to do that as well, you know? So that's important too, which is once you're in it and you admit that you're in it and you are dealing with it, transcendent, but within it, then you can find love and laughter and things even within tragedy. And we know this again from human experience in history, right? That wars are terrible, but within the midst of war, there is love, and even more intense and profound love than happens in times of peace because of what the demands of the anima mundi are making, right? The world soul in transformation. So, yeah. And I said, yeah, eat right. Got to eat right. I think I said that too.
Yeah, that home metaphor, that really, really landed for me. I like that a lot. So let's open it up to questions. I'll unmute you when I call your name. So Terry Patton, you have a couple of questions. I'm going to unmute you so you can ask that to Zach.
You know, in your essay, Zach, so much sobriety and even a kind of sternness regarding the high probability of personal moral failures in this war in heaven between our better and darker angels. And I think implicit in that are some forms that this might take that are most prominent when you wrote the essay in your awareness, and also maybe least likely to be obvious to others. And I'd like to invite you to reflect and elaborate.
Right. I mean, in a sense, I was writing to several different kind of echelons, right? Because some of what we're seeing at the highest levels of decision making is hard to explain, which is why we're getting so much conspiracy theory, right? Because you're looking at the highest levels of decision making in political life, not just like in the last few weeks, but like for a couple of decades. And you're thinking, how did we get in this situation? These were humans making choices over time. And so when you think about the war in heaven, you're thinking about what are the ideals that our leaders have lived by that allowed a society like this to exist? When was the choice made in their subjectivity to align themselves with one ideal for humanity as opposed to another? right? So one strata I'm writing to, excuse me, is just the, you know, the power, right? And the corruption of power. And the fact that now that the world has come unpatterned, the possibility for power plays is ridiculously big, right? So who's driving which truck through this huge opening into the future of infrastructure and economics and mental health and education and biometrics, right? Who's driving through that? And so part of me is writing to that and saying, like, you got a devil on your shoulder, right? But there's an angel too. And so at that highest level, there's this possibility for either get off the stage if you can't do the right thing, or realign yourself at a higher level. And then for the everyday, right, for the salt of the earth, this is about the basic orientation of selfishness versus care, as far as I can see it, right? It's separation versus approach. And so in a sense, I'm writing to all the people who took way too much toilet paper, right? It's like, just check yourself, right? Because what happened is the imagination opened up and all of the horrible scenarios flooded in, and they couldn't control the most base instinct, which is self-protection. Now, why toilet paper? I don't know. I'm not a good enough psychologist, right? But there's something about the root chakra, something about the root chakra, and something about the stuff we have in our lives going on that we don't want anyone else to see, which now may become apparent because everything's been unpatterned, right? And so at the more base level, I'm just thinking about what we're all doing, because I'm not like a hyper agent. I'm not someone making massive decisions affecting the future of infrastructure and commodity supply chains and healthcare. But I am making decisions on a day-to-day basis, right? And it's the question of, when am I choosing out of a basic orientation of separation and selfishness, and when am I choosing basically to lead with love and care and concern? And so far, thank God, I've been able to make, I feel, the right choice, and I can go to bed at night feeling good that I haven't become someone worse as a result of being put in a more difficult situation, right? And so that's the basic request, is that as the situation gets more difficult, can you continue to be who you want to be? Can you continue to be committed to the things that allow you to be an integrous person, right? A real someone committed to your ideals. And so, yeah, so that's that knife edge, basically. And that's the battle in heaven. It's actually this battle in the imaginal realms in our own minds between different possible selves, right? These different trajectories of choice. And I've seen people in difficult situations who get in a kind of a choice cascade of bad choices, of a choice cascade of selfless choices. And then you end up, the situation becomes much worse than it already was. Because now you were like overwhelmed by your own inability to be the person you wanted to be in the difficult situation. And so there's just this, there's just a primacy on trying to give people the capacity to be the person that they want to be. Basically, that's what I'm trying to do in the whole essay. And so I didn't have particular, bad actions or in mind. It was just that I've seen this choice point. And but it's also that I think the scales are tipped toward the light, if I can say that. And there's a bunch of reasons to think that. But interesting research on both post-traumatic growth as a profound possibility within humans, and research on what happens in natural disaster situations. Just spontaneous emergence of caregiving, like people who used to hate one another, the hurricane comes and now he's like pulling the guy out of his house on the raft, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like the stories we see on the news are the terrible, horrible stories. But most of what happens behind the scenes in those kind of events is people doing quite extraordinary stuff. And so the more of that happens, the more that's likely to happen. And so I'm imagining a grassroots cascade of good choice making, which allows, as the going gets tough, to tip the balance. which is all I'm seeking, is to tip the balance, not to save the day because we're in a tragedy, but to tip the balance so that in the long run, a lot of people can look back on what has happened and be like, whoa, I am a better person for it, even though I may have suffered more than I thought it was possible to suffer, or been more courageous than I thought it was possible for me, or whatever, right? So it's that moral fortitude. How do we get that in a post-truth culture?
If you don't mind, just a brief follow-up. I'm quite aware that I'm in relative comfort and in this enforced retreat that gives me space to be reflective, but that in future moments it'll perhaps be much more binding and much more challenging. And so there's a kind of work in the anticipation of a squeeze that might be incumbent upon us right now, and a kind of, as much as, decades and decades of spiritual practice in so many different ways, I've intended to dedicate my life toward the good. But this interruption asks for whatever I've known to be recognized as provisional and something more to be possible. And so I can't take for granted the wisdom I've already integrated as sufficient. And so there is an opportunity for a kind of not knowing and listening and just openness, of course, but perhaps a more radical kind of preparation. And I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think it's good to be thinking that way. So people talk about how, like, oh, well, there could be another wave of infections in the fall, right? Because this is how the 1918 pandemic went, right? And so whether or not that's true biologically, there's certainly truth to the fact that psychologically, this fall is going to be difficult, right? That right now we are in anxious, kind of like shocked and like primed, right? And loss is happening. All kinds of loss, investments of time and energy and all these things are now, and so loss is happening. So if you look at the time cycles of those things, as a psychologist, you see that it takes time for those kinds of events to sink in and things, and then there's a whoop, right? There's like a depressive breakdown. And so what we need to do now is basically build networks of connections, social relationships, which is why I'm saying talk to the people you love and expand the circle of people that you love and the concreteness of those conversations, so that there is something there to catch us all when the going gets hard or harder, as you're saying, Terry. And God, let it not be the case that it gets harder, right? Like, God, let us be overreacting, please. But let's prepare just in case. And that preparation would be to build those networks, to have those conversations, and to, be conscious, like be explicit, like, hey, we're connecting now and it could get harder, and I'll be there for you and you'll be there for me. And those things, those conversations matter more now than they ever did. And knowing that you've got a couple people, right? 3 or 4 people, maybe if you're lucky, you have more, right? Who will be there to talk to you. Like, that's so important. So the main thing, it's not to me like some fancy meditation practice or some fancy prayer practice or anything like. It's not that. It's actually something about community and relationship and those conversations that get us in touch with the other realities that are here on the earth, right? Which are realities of love and realities of vision and imagination, right? And so to see those, we have to be together and we have to start getting comfortable being more intimate, even though we're in fact physically distanced. So that would be my prepper guide, would be, I'm not like a prepper, like stockpile food and all that stuff. I'm like, that's not really going to matter, right? If you don't have community and relationship and the ability to be with people. There's no escape hatch, right? and this is a shout out to like the really wealthy people. There's no escape hatch, right? There's actually no place you can bug out, right? Every escape hatch goes deeper in to some kind of intensity of relationship and culture, right? So just we have to realize that we're in it all together. And so, yeah, go out, stand 10 feet away and talk to your neighbor, right? Figure out who's around. And that would be my recommendation as far as preparing for the emotional kind of journey that we're headed for. Thank you,
Cool.
Terry. It's good to see you, Terry.
So I'm going to call on Ashley. Ashley, I'll unmute you.
Hello. So I'm an educator, and I was wondering what are some actionable steps I can take in bringing my students up to speed. But moreover, I have connections with our local mayor, and so the other day I was thinking, like, if I was to have a conversation with the mayor, what does that conversation look like in this time and space without turning him off to the transitions that I see forming and at the opportune time to have those conversations?
Interesting. I mean, as an educator as well, I'm somewhat biased, but I think the conversation with the mayor is a conversation about the kids, right? Like, because other people are having conversations with the mayor about like testing and quarantine procedure and hand washing and all that stuff, right? But for me, as a psychologist educator, again, the main event is what's happening right now to the kids. Like everyone's affected,
Mm-hmm.
but there are certain developmental transitions, particularly adolescence, where this is like not great to be an adolescent right now. Like it's terrible to be a vulnerable old person. This is correct. But from an identity formation perspective, right? The people who are forming their adult identities now under these life conditions are the leaders of the future and will determine what happens 10 years from now. Right. And they may be, given the history of civil unrest globally, they may be determining what happens just a few months from now, right? You have to look at Maoism and Nazism, and you look at the growth of massive civil unrest movements, and you're looking at disenfranchised adolescent or early adult males. And so there's a huge need to focus on creating resources and opportunities for adolescents to do work that's not rote, meaningless schoolwork. That is work that makes them feel like they're contributing to their communities. So like interview projects with teams of adolescents and old people who have stories to share, like, is huge, I think. Those forms of intergenerational transmission. Other things that adolescents can do to feel like they're creative, right? Co-creating videos that talk to their experience, or I'm just saying we can't be thinking about how to get these kids prepared for college, right? Now's not the time for that. Now's the time to help them through the coming months and to give them tools that will be empowering them, especially in terms of their identities. And also to just not make them feel invisible, because right now I think there are many populations, in fact, that feel completely invisible, who are very, very vulnerable, but not in the ways that people think. And I can speak into that, but I'm speaking to adolescents now because the media focuses on this one thing. It's as if nothing else is happening, but there's a lot of other stuff happening. And some of what's happening is millions and millions of adolescents cut off from their friends at a time when developmentally is precisely when they should be out of the house hanging with their friends, right? Not for having fun, but for having the necessary differentiation from the parental holding container to have an autonomous identity and all that stuff, right? So that's a little bit of it. I would talk to the mayor about something like that. Like we already had an adolescent mental health crisis, right? And then this happened. What can we do to actually somehow seize the moment? And I think it's critical for, for the future that this affect the youth in a net positive way, which is to say that it's an opportunity for maturation, which creates a generation that's very powerful, as opposed to something that's very debilitating. So that's where I'm thinking in those areas.
Can I follow up?
Totally.
If you were talking about boots on the ground, so if there's one topic, I mean, it could be identity development. I work with both high schoolers, but I'm also adjunct college. So if we're talking boots on the ground, I feel like there's this spiritual pickedness, right, in our society, and it's this taboo space to access with these younger generations, because there's no grounding as a society right now. Is there a topic that you think would resonate with them, to be a springboard for them to understand the power that they have, and where to go with that power from here forward?
Interesting. I mean, I keep returning to that the kids need to learn history from their elders. I keep returning to that, because really the key to them actualizing their historical agency as a generation and as individuals is by knowing where they are in history. And so especially the stories from elders that are about times that were fundamentally different than the times now, right? That actually, in a way, normalize these times, because we realize that, whoa, other generations have had abrupt world historical significant events occur. And so, I think if we could get them to engage in a form of intergenerational kind of conversation and let them steer, like let them ask the questions to the elders that they want to ask. It's our responsibility to get that container created and to make it appealing and valued by the society, that this is as important or more important than your schoolwork, right? To have every day an hour-long conversation with an older person from the community who you've never met, right? And you run through your series of questions, and you start to get this like panorama of all these different lives and all these different time periods, right? So that, I think, is some of it. And other forms of creativity, with digital cameras and recording equipment and a bunch of stuff, there is the possibility for capturing their first person experiences basically artistically and creating something like a museum of adolescent and childhood artistic expressions of dealing with the crisis, basically. So like a collaborative art project among hundreds of groups of adolescents or something like that. And I'm just completely spitballing. I haven't thought it through. But my hope is that, and I'm sure there are people trying to think about this stuff, and so, Godspeed to the people doing that work, because it's necessary.
I love that, because Backlard talks about shadow boxes and time and space, and understanding how even inorganic objects are meaningful. So I love it. Thank you very much for the feedback.
Thank you.
All right, Amy, you had a question. I will unmute you.
Oh, so I'm also an educator, and you had mentioned this the concept of the one-room schoolhouse in your essay a bit, and I was wondering what your kind of vision of the one-room schoolhouse of the future is, and if this could analog or scale to adults, as in like a one-room schoolhouse working situation.
Interesting. Yeah, I in my book Education in a Time Between Worlds, I lay out in some detail this vision of what I call an educational hub network. And what it is, it's basically you could take an existing school system and you gut all the school buildings. So you change the architecture of the school buildings to make those buildings something more like a community center / co-working space / library / museum. In that place, you have a bunch of technology and a bunch of teachers, citizens, scientists who basically facilitate the creation of pop-up classrooms that also implicate the parents in the community. So next to the Education Hub Network, there's a whole bunch of social miracles, including basic income guarantee, which basically allows parents the freedom to re-engage in their own education, specifically targeted towards being able to help their children in this Education Hub network. So the back-end technology is something like a time and skill sharing and content delivery system, which houses all the skills and curricula within the community. And that includes not just the official teachers, but also the parents and professionals in the community who want to be part of that. So this is, if those of you who've read Ivan Illich, Deschooling Society, this is like a version of that. So the one-room schoolhouse is actually everywhere around that hub. There are all of these classrooms popping up where, let's say, a student who wants to study a particular historical time period finds several other students who want to study that time period at different ages. They find two adults who have a knowledge and a location in the city where that time period is relevant, right? And then for 3 hours, that location in the city becomes a classroom where kids of different ages are interacting around a historical event with the guidance of, let's say, someone paid by the state to be there and two parents who are, or an old person who was actually there at the time that it happened there. So that's the vision. It's a very decentralized way of thinking about having an educational network structure. A lot hinges upon the technological backend, which is what coordinates the pop-up classrooms and actually houses all the student work and creates a kind of self-organizing assessment system, so that it ends up being quite a complicated technological problem as well, as far as getting that many students into that much diverse activity and still assuring educational equity and still assuring the basic acquisition of things like reading and writing. And so there's more to it, but that's kind of the basic vision. And right now, in some places, but certainly not in all places, you're having little visions of this, where a school has now all of a sudden had to run like a spoken hub model. It's had to run all these little classrooms in every living room in the town, right? And we're trying to do that, but there's so much variability in how well that's being done right now. But we're becoming aware that this is a modality of education that the digital affords.
Cool. So we may have time for one or two questions. Alex S., I'm going to unmute you if you can ask your question.
Hey, thanks, Peter. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Thanks, Zach, for coming out and joining us in the forum. So I'm finding your presentation really interesting on a number of levels. But the thing I was wondering about, it kind of actually piggybacks on a question. I think it was Nicholas who asked it. It was one of the first ones, and it had to do with the mythical poetic side of things. That's the word that he used. I was wondering, so to me it seems like, when thinking about this crisis, these large-scale events that are going on, there can be two approaches there, sort of a right hand and a left hand, maybe. So there is the kind of rational, scientific, philosophical approach. And I guess I see Stoicism as an example of that, right? The Stoics were very logical, they were all about reason, but also reason as virtue, right? Not just like narrow self-interest, but still, like, they were all about logic and reason in that sense. And then you have the kind of more mythical side on the other hand, that seems to be more about emotion. If the Stoics are all about harmony, here there's this emphasis on struggle, right? Conflict. And you talk about, the end of things in your article. And so I'm wondering, like, how you see, you talk about reason there as well in your piece, and I'm just wondering how you see those two interacting. Is one more important than the other? How do they come together? Thanks.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, so you're setting up like the two. I would actually say that there's three, because you have the kind of rational, scientific, let's say the mythopoetic, and I think you have the artistic or subjective, which is getting at a different thing. And my sense is that, and I try to get at this in the article, which is that none of those alone are sufficient, and each of those need one another. That the rational ends up, if you follow it through like the Stoics did, the rational ends up pointing beyond itself, right? But the mythic ends up also being incomplete, right? Because it asks questions of the world, which we can act on and get answers about. And then, of course, the artistic requires those other two as input, that the artistic can't stand alone. It actually has to do with some take on the nature of the world and some take on what it means. And then you're putting it out individually with an aesthetic presentation. So I'm seeing like a complex kind of relationship between all three of those, where I wouldn't say one is primary, but that they're in some kind of moving dance, some kind of evolving dance. And so what I'm asking people who are oriented to the spiritual and the mythological to do is, in a sense, start becoming more rational. And what I'm in the paper anyway, and what I'm asking the people who are orienting just as scientists to do is to say, hey, admit the fact that the thoughts of the heart matter. And the paper itself is more like something I'm singing, right? Because I'm not really arguing anything and I'm not citing any facts. I'm just expressing myself, basically. So the paper is, in fact, making almost an aesthetic validity claim more than anything else. But there's a harmony to the aesthetic, right? And there's a truthfulness that's expressed in those. So I'm seeing, yeah, I guess I'm saying it's not the one or the other. It's actually this much more complex. It's not even dialectical, because I'm saying three. This is me actually rooting into Landry's metaphysics for orientation, for those of you who are into the footnotes. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it. And in the paper, like I said, I'm trying to strike a balance essentially between all three.
Great. We'll squeeze in one more question. Nicholas, would you like to ask your question? If you can put yourself off mute.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Peter. So thank you, Zach, for being here.
Hey, man.
So I just wanted to sort of ask, so the Stoa is really like a space that is so foreign from my everyday life, right? Like the conversations we're having here are just so, like they make sense to the people that partake in this space, but if you try and, get to these difficult conversations that you were mentioning, so you sort of already elaborated on the role of language, but how does this language have to evolve in order for
Right.
people to sort of understand and to help them with the transition to the new world, right? Or because we're in between these two worlds, like you said. So I want to keep it short so you can maybe still quickly answer. I think you sort of know what I'm getting
Right.
about.
Totally. This is actually a great question. This is the question that the therapist and the educator and the parent needs to ask, right? Which is, it's not like, how do I beam you to the top of the mountain so you can see the view? It's like, if I beam you to the top, like teleport you to the top of the mountain, you'll be disoriented and confused. Maybe you'll be excited and you'll see some stuff, but then when you go back down, you won't remember how you got there or what happened. So what you need to do is figure out that path up the mountain, and it will take time. But it's one of the kind of crisis moments, is that, in fact, everyone's being asked right now to be some kind of philosopher or saint. Like, everyone has to stay home, behave right, face death, worry, and handle their shit, and still work and take care of the kids and stuff. It's like, whoa, everyone is being beamed to the top of the Stoic mountain to try to remain calm and find harmony in the midst of chaos. So that means for those of us who, by whatever means or fate, ended up climbing quite a distance before this happened. There is some obligation to try to find a way, not to like just drop it all on the table at once, like boom, you know, like that's the worst pedagogical advice. You need to find the ways in, right? Both the moments in the conversation and those topics that are naturally philosophical, right? Good teachers can kind of recognize like, oh, that's like a vein that we can get in and kind of open up because you're already interested in it, right? You're not afraid to go there. So like, yeah, so that's basically kind of a teacherly advice to say, be a careful enough conversation partner to kind of to follow their lead. Like that's what pedagogy means. It means to lead along. So, but first you need to see kind of where they're going in a sense. Like you need to detect it and be careful, and then know when you're pushing too far, right? Know when they can't handle it anymore. Yeah, so I think, but just to ask the question is astute, right? Because many people who operate philosophically or just tracking more, they'll just dump it on people, even when people can't handle it, don't want to handle it, don't want to think about it, right? So I'm careful like this with my own family. It's like just little droplets of stuff that I'm seeing, not the whole deluge, which would send him into a panic attack or something, right? So there just needs to be this care, even in conversation, and you're caring for their better self, right? So it's not like what's Ken Wilber used to call idiot compassion. Idiot compassion is when you let the alcoholic stay an alcoholic because you're just being nice because you don't want to make him feel bad. That's not what we're doing. This is a subtle balance between challenge and support, essentially, with a clear and explicit sense of like, I love you no matter what, even if you never come to grips with it. So there also has to be that sense of like, people can learn and change and transform. People can even roll over their identity if they're held in a safe container. So often what I do before these conversations is have other conversations that makes it clear that we're friends, it's safe, you know, like we can still be together. I don't need you to understand me or follow me here for me to respect you and love you, right? So give that containment and support, and then challenge and deepen and contextualize and all of those things that you want to do to bring people out of a narrower view. So, but good, it's the right question to ask. Yeah.
And that's an amazing answer. So thank you so much. Wow. That helps a lot.
Great. So we'll close up in a moment, but I'd just like to hand it to Zach for any kind of closing thoughts.
This was wonderful for me. Like I said, I hadn't taught to like a classroom of people in a while. And so it was really nice to see all your faces and to get the different questions from people in different places. And yeah, so I feel better now than I did when I started the call. So I'm proving my own point, which is that just talking with people in a long form and being together it's important for us. And so just thank you guys and keep up your good work and keep this going, and let me know if I can, kind of help anyone in any way. You can find my email through my website, or Peter can give it to you. So please reach out if there's something that I can do.
Great. And I'll make some closing announcements for upcoming events in a moment. But Zach, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today. It was a wonderful experience.
Hey, all right. So I'll take off. See you guys.
See ya.
Take care.
So for upcoming events, I'll announce the next three. We have Adam Robert coming in at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the philosophy, the practice of death and dying. As Plato famously said, true philosophy is the practice of death and dying. So that's going to be a talk and a Q&A similar to this. And then at 7:30, right after that, we're going to have an existential dance party with Colin Morris from the Zion 2.0 podcast. That should be a treat. Last week was really, really fun. And then tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, Richard Bartlett's coming in for experimental exercise called alongsideness. And how he described it is, we're so kind of fixated on our vision that sometimes we just need to pause and look beside us and see who is alongside us. So we designed some interesting conversational techniques to be compatible with Zoom. So you can RSVP all that to all that on the website, sign up for the mailing list. And I'm viewing the Stoa as a gift to everyone to freely use in this time of need. And if you're inspired to provide a gift to the Stoa, feel free to go on the website, and at the bottom there's more information at the gift economy section. All right, so thank you so much everyone for coming out with excellent questions today. That was awesome.